All right, my name is John. Today we're going to be installing a Trucourse rudder in a Scupper 14. The rudder is made by Sealect Designs, and the first thing you got to do is take out any old pedals that might have been in there and install just the front stud on these new pedals. Okay, we're going in the lower hole here for these. You can go, if you're taller and need more pedal height than the front, you can go up to the upper hole, but generally go to the lower hole. So most people just don't need it. That doesn't have to be very tight. You're gonna have to move it anyway. Just need it in there for location. And I generally put the slots, this thing has a slot and a hole. I generally put the slots in the front, but it really doesn't matter. It'll go in either way. Now, I usually use a few pieces of tape just to space where the hole goes, and this tape will get used later to locate the pedals. And once this is actually in line with where it needs to go, I usually put 3 layers. This is 1.5" tape, so you're looking about 4.5 inches back. And I usually still go a little more in front of it, so you're actually more like 5 or 6 inches. This hole could be back further than it needs to be. It just can't be too far forward, otherwise you run out of play with the pedal. It'll end up hitting up front and then binding back. So I'm gonna go in line with that hole, or in line with this hole. And drilling this hole is kind of a pain. Starting out with a high speed and then dipping into where you need to go is actually the easiest way to get it to make a hole without the drill bit just walking on you. So. As soon as you get the hole, lay the drill bit over and angle the hole backwards. Give it a little twist. Okay, so once the hole's in place, you're gonna need to trim a little bit of the fray that comes out. You don't have to, but I would. It looks better. Why not? Okay, I got one hole there. All right, so I usually go about 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch maybe behind the tape. Aim that hole backwards. And cut the junk off around the outside. All right. On the back where the cables come through, you want to start out perpendicular to this face so the drill bit doesn't just walk. But as you go, you're going to want to start to actually aim it forward and more in the direction that it's actually going to come out. So go right about here. Now that I got a hole started, I'm actually going to move the drill bit and aim forward, straight forward, parallel with the keel. You don't want to ream that out. You want to leave that a little bit tight. You want the cable housing to be kind of tight in there, or quite tight in there. So here again, start perpendicular to this face, get yourself a little bit of a hole, and then re-angle the drill. And those are the holes you need. Running the cable housing through, you're going to want to cut an angle into the front. You want a point basically on there to be able to get it through the rear hole. You want that to be kind of sharp. You want when you're running the cable housing, you want the natural curl of this cable housing to go up, and if anything, a little bit in or even up against the side. And it might take a couple of tries to be able to see it, to get it past there. But once you get it past the hole where the fishing pole holder goes, from there it's pretty easy. But just getting it there is difficult. It wants to curl up underneath the seat and kind of go all over the place. So you want to use the natural curl that comes in it to your advantage and keep it up against the side of the boat or end up. So it'll end up back there. And it may take a couple of tries. It's not always right. You want to use this hole to be able to tell where you're going and what's happening. And you can adjust where it's going slightly anyway. by twisting this as you go. But you got to figure out where it is first. So you want to try and stay to the outside of the boat as it goes backwards. So once you see the end of it like this, you want to, this hole right here is actually what you're fighting. You want to stay on the outside. You want to be in this gap here. If it goes on towards the center of the boat and is on the wrong side of this hole, it's not going to be right. So you can watch it through here and help guide it to the outboard edge of that hole and guide it along the side. And if you have to, you can twist it to move the end around to get it where you need to. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, it's easier just to pull this. Get it long enough to where you want it. So another thing, this should actually matter, is you don't want this too twisted. You want to make sure that it's kind of in its natural position, figure out which way is up, keep that up. So your housing doesn't have a gnarly twist in it. There's no twist in it. This is up. Keep that up. There we go. So you don't need a lot sticking out there. Pull the extra out this way. And you want to feel inside here. Just right off the bat, as you put this in, you actually want this to be very tight. We're going to relieve that tension later so it's not tight, but right now, I actually want this to be pretty tight. Makes it easier. So I'm just going to leave, don't need to leave much there. Then same steps on the other side. Basically just repeat. Pull it tight. You need to use a little bit of caulking, silicone, urethane, Sikaflex, whatever you got, honestly, it's probably going to work just fine. It just needs to be watertight. It's not structural. But you want to put just the slightest tiny bead as close as you can to the boat without just getting it everywhere. Doesn't take a lot. Onto the hose, or the cable housing. And then we're going to take it, shove it in, twist it around, get that sealant everywhere, all around that hole. So it's on the inside of there. Okay, then these little cover plates get put over that. And I usually put a blob of I keep saying Sikaflex, a blob of some sort of sealant on the inside in here. This, you want to have enough hose to really fill that. So I'm going to pull out just a little more. Just going to get that piece of tape out of the way. And here's where this right angle drill comes in handy. You want to leave, I generally leave just a little bit of that cable housing sticking out, just for good measure. If it falls in there, you might never get it back. Usually hand tighten these the rest of the way because drills can overdo it and strip things out. So. Yeah, and then try and get that out of there. There, and repeat that on the other side. On the back here, you want to pull it, make sure it's still tight. If it's not, if you've changed your tension based on what you did up front, you want to make sure it's still fairly tight. Don't pull it out of what you did in the front. Just give it a little bit to make sure the tension is correct and they're where they're supposed to be. Then do the same thing back here by putting a small blob as close to the boat as you can. It's getting out of control. That was a big blob. Doesn't take a lot back here. And you can very, very easily make a big mess. So back here, you're going to do the same thing and just move it around. Don't twist it around to where you twist the whole cable, or at least lose track of where you've twisted it. You just go back and forth and go in and out to drag that adhesive into there, make sure it's sealed. And then because we don't want these under a lot of tension, I generally push it in about a good 1/4 of an inch or so. You should be able to feel under here that it's not tight like a guitar string anymore, but it's also not just sagging down. If it's under high tension, if you don't do this, if it's under too high a tension and you put it on your car, you hit a large bump, just the weight of the cable can actually suck the cable housing in and you can lose it. And it just screws everything up. So you don't want it to be too tight. If it's too loose, it'll flop around and your rudder won't be very sensitive. It won't work very well. So yeah, push that in just a little bit until this isn't quite so taut. And then just slice off the extra. And those are the cable housings. Installing the cable is quite straightforward. Just run the cable in until you got enough in there. If the end of the cable's frayed, it's not going to want to go in very well. So you want to get a nice clean edge on your cable. There's an abrupt bend that we just put in it. It doesn't want to take that bend if it's frayed. Okay, I usually pull this so there's about 6 inches or so sticking past the back of the boat. You know, about that much or so. Just give yourself enough. And then up here, generally go about the same thing. You want about another 6 inches sticking out. And run it the other side. Okay. All right, so the reason we left this detached in the back is because we still have to put the actual cable onto the pedal. Now this requires a little piece of shrink wrap tubing. You only need about 3/8 of an inch or so per side. And these little cable stays. Now both of these, you got to put the shrink wrap tubing on the cable first, and then this cable crimp second, then run it through the pedal. I generally go through the top of the pedal and then back around the bottom, because then the crimp ends up on the bottom. Doesn't really matter. Just leave this out of the way until you get it crimped. Try to leave about a 1/4 of an inch of cable sticking out the back of that crimp, and you want the hole to be as small as reasonably possible. And crimp the crimp. Okay, now that's crimped, the shrink wrap tubing comes up and goes just a little bit onto the crimp. It can be difficult to get it on the crimp, especially if your shrink wrap tubing is really small. Get it a little bit up on the crimp and then shrink it. And that just keeps that end from stabbing you in the leg. Now that this is where it needs to be, put the pedal back in and put the last screw in the front. And also tighten the front screw that we left loose earlier. Push the rest of the cable in. Now this tape gets transferred. I generally, with this setup, leave the hole sticking out, basically leave the pedal right about there, and then tape it in place. So it doesn't move for the next step. So now this won't pull, and I can adjust them evenly. And that's recycling the tape. Do the same on the other side. Now this gudgeon can go in either way. It can go all different directions. We want to put it in with the holes at the top, otherwise the rudder is going to be up quite a bit taller than it needs to be. So holes at the top. This rudder goes on a lot of different boats. It would work the other way, it'd just be a lot taller than necessary, and you wouldn't have as much of it sticking in the water so it wouldn't end up as effective. Just gonna pull these screws out. Okay, so these screws on the side that go this direction, one of them is gonna stay on the pin, so you really only have to pull one of these. But I would start with one of those. You want to keep that washer. Don't lose those. Those are important. There's another washer in there. Don't lose that. Yeah, these washers are kind of a pain. There's a little shoulder that they sit on, and when you go to put it back together, it'll want to slide off and be like that, and just that little bit, you'll feel it, it'll click back down when it goes back in. If it sits up on that shoulder, it won't go back together right. If it doesn't want to go back together, check that first, because that little shoulder is kind of a bear. So run your cables through the outside holes here. The other two holes are for the screws. Don't put them through those. You want to pull off your, I don't know, attachment plates, or whatever you call these. Okay, I generally leave this on here like this because these are kind of a pain to get in. But this needs to be basically shoved back into a loop. So yeah, you want to create a loop in there that you can then get this down on top of, get to your hole. There we go. It doesn't have to be tight yet. You don't want to tighten it yet. Just need it under there. Do the same thing to the other side. Again, just put a loop in this thing, get the whole thing like that. Okay, now this is why we taped the pedals down. You want to leave with these plates loose still. You want to pull these and get your rudder straight, because this is what's going to keep it from just walking one direction and actually make sure it's right. You don't want to put too much tension on them because it's not going to do any good. Just make sure they're straight, tighten them down. Okay, you don't have to go too crazy here. You can strip these out. Now, I like to leave a good about 4 inches or so on the end of this. It makes it so if anything happens, like say that front loop came out or something happened, there's actually enough on here that you could redo the loop on the front, loosen this, and slide the whole cable forward and not actually have to replace the cable. And I throw another crimp on the end of each cable to keep it intact. So you're probably going to want to get a close up on this. So I'm going to move. Well, actually, I want to leave that in place. If you look down inside there, there's a little ball in there. I'll just take it out so you can see it. It's the easiest way to do that. This has to go through this pin inside of there. If that is not in place, the front of the rudder rides on this. It rides up and down that. If this isn't in the pin, which there is room in there for it to slide forward and backwards, If that's not in the right spot, the rudder will not work correctly. It definitely won't deploy when you want it to. It'll create too much drag. But you can see how that actually rolls around. There's room for it to move. It needs to be back there where the pin will actually go through it. That's easier with the whole thing just in place. So when you go to put the sides back on, make sure the washer is in there. And you got to make sure that roller in there is back far enough and this pin goes through that. It will not work right if it's not through there. If it's down, it'll still move back and forth just right, but it won't go up and down very easily at all, or if at all. There, so now that's in place. You can feel that washer is definitely not where it's supposed to be. It's kind of hard to get it to go up on there and stay. Okay, now here's what I do at the very end of this. Basically curl this in and try and shove it to the outside, and then you can just kind of slip that in. Just kind of slip that in at the last second, and then the cover will go on. Get a screw in it to hold it in place. That one's the hardest cover to get on because it has the pin and you got to line up the roller and all that kind of stuff. The other side's not so tough. Just make sure the washer is on the floor and lost. Oh, it's over there? Okay. Yeah. Don't lose parts. Try not to. But yeah, make sure the washer is on there where it's supposed to be. And then kind of wrestle this to the outside. And then just last second, shove it in there. Now there's enough cable in there to replace the front loop or mess with it back here if you need to. Okay, now we're going to put on the actuator rope, I guess you'd call it. I'm not really sure what that's called. The way you put it up and down. So we usually put the rudder rope on the right side. If you're left-handed, you can put it on the left, put it wherever you want. But one of the easiest ways to start is to just get it through the rudder itself. This rope's a little big. It's better to go bigger than smaller. I generally put it through on the side that the rudder is going. Not that it really matters, it'd probably work fine either way. Just think it looks better. But this hole's pretty small up here in the top of the rudder, so you could just tie a good knot. Burn the end of your rope so it's not going to come undone on you. And that's good to go. So yeah, run your rope through both of these. Yeah, through both deck fittings. Pull it tight. Got way too much in here. Okay, we've got two of these little footman loops. The big one goes in the back. And the big one just gets centered. So I don't need that right now. The big one just gets centered right here in the front of this rudder cutout. It's just going to go right there. Screw it down. Again, don't go crazy. It's pretty easy to strip this out. So. That's to help pull the rudder up. Now up here, because it's strung between these 2 points, the second footman loop, the small one, goes between these, just in front of this, in front of that point there. And I try to center it, have a little bit of tension on that, and actually center it so it doesn't actually touch the rope. It's just there to keep it from getting snagged. But if it doesn't touch the rope, it doesn't add any drag and makes it easier for the rudder to deploy and get put up. So. And again, I final tighten these by hand, because pretty much any drill will easily strip it. And then this is a crimp, or I don't even know what you call that. What holds the rope. This is going to go in line with this. It generally looks best if it's straight light off of that and just a couple of inches behind your fishing pole holder. So you want to go right about there. With the rudder up is when you have the most rope out. The rudder down, you want to decide where you're going to put your little ball that you put on the end of the rope. Generally leave just a few inches like this. If you leave just a little bit more, it can actually, when you're not using it and the rudder's down, it can actually go inside the fishing pole holder. So I generally like to leave 6 inches or so there. Okay, so put your little ball on. Oh man, this rope is fraying bad. With the rope this diameter, you're actually going to need to do kind of a double knot. Basically just a granny knot, but run it through twice. Don't have to go the full hammer fist length or anything, just a decent sized knot so it won't pull through that. And now, okay, so in the back here, this comes not tied fully. Doesn't usually come out. I got a little carried away. This has to be adjusted. They give you extra, but this has to go through, and you're going to want to use, only about 4 or 5 inches of length in there before you tie a knot on this, and you can just tie a knot in it and test it before you cut the extra off. But you want about that much or so. Then test it and see if there's enough to actuate it and to actually bring it back. It does actually come back, but it's a little slow. So I'm going to take it up just a little bit more. There's kind of a balancing act here too, because if you make that too short, it won't even come up all the way, which that is up pretty much all the way. But if you make it too short and you leave it up like that, you'll end up stretching this out over time because this is under quite a lot of tension. I don't recommend storing the boat like this. If it's going to be stored, you're going to want to leave the rudder down because it'll extend the life of this bungee right here. But now that we've got it where we want it, trim off the extra. Burn the end. And now it goes up and down like we want it to. It can go up and lock in place by putting the rope through this crimp here. And then you've got this extra can either go back here in the deck, or you can even shove it in the fishing pole holder if you want. But with it down, that's another thing. As you're putting it down, you want to hold the rudder up because it's easy to get it pinched in here as you let it down. As it pulls the rope in, it wants to go back in there and just get itself stuck. So you want to hold this up and let it down like that. But now we can test, take the tape off our pedals up here. Test that the rudder works, which it does. Full throw either direction. Yeah, we got full throw without hitting. Basically, the rudder is at its full extent back there before the pedals actually hit the front or this cable bottoms out in the back either. That's a good way to wear everything out. So it does work. We've tested it all works correctly. Actuation is correct. It goes up and down, and that's how you install a rudder on a Scupper 14.